After my millionaire grandfather passed and left everything to me, my parents, who had ignored me my whole life, tried to sue me for the inheritance. When I walked into the courtroom, my mom rolled her eyes. But the judge suddenly froze and said, "Wait, the charges are against you?" They never realized who I really was. I can still see the disdain in my mother's eyes the second I walked into that courtroom. Not a subtle eye roll, either, but the kind that screams, "Here we go again. She's such an inconvenience." It was her perfectly rehearsed victim performance, but then, something incredible happened. Judge Brennan froze. His eyes flickered from the paperwork, then snapped to my face, and I watched, captivated, as a freight train of recognition hit him square in the face. "Wait," he said slowly, setting down his pen. "These allegations are against you?" Oh, my parents had absolutely no idea who I really was, and honestly, that was the best part. So, let me back up about 3 months. My grandfather had just passed away. He was Judge William Parker, a giant of a man who'd served 40 years on the Supreme Court bench. But to me, he was just Grandpa, the man who actually raised me while my biological parents were off living their best lives, pretending I didn't exist. His funeral was huge. Every judge, attorney, and politician in the state showed up to pay their respects. I delivered the eulogy. My parents? Diane and Scott Morrison, as I call them, sat in the back row, arrived late, and left before the reception. Classic. I hadn't seen them in over a decade, not since my 18th birthday when my grandmother, Helen, died. They showed up for exactly 90 minutes, then vanished again. After Grandma Helen passed, it was just Grandpa and me. He was 73 then, still sharp as a tack, still working, still making sure I had every opportunity he could possibly provide. Here's the thing about my parents. My mother got pregnant at 18 and decided motherhood just cramped her style. My father, Scott, was a promising hockey player with big dreams. A baby didn't fit that aesthetic. So, they did what selfish people do. They dropped me at my grandparents' house when I was 3 months old and basically vanished. Oh, they'd visit, maybe twice a year, if the stars aligned, Christmas and maybe my birthday. Diane would show up in designer clothes, air kiss my cheek, and spend the entire visit critiquing how Grandma was raising me. Too soft, apparently. Meanwhile, Scott completely avoided these visits because Grandpa never held back, calling him out for being a deadbeat. So, I watched my father on TV instead. Every time the Bruins played, Grandpa had the game on. Not because he cared about hockey, but because he wanted me to know my father existed somewhere, even if he chose not to exist in my life. But honestly, I never felt like I was missing anything. Grandma Helen and Grandpa William gave me everything. Real love, the kind that shows up. They were at every school play, every soccer game, every debate competition. They were my parents in every way that truly mattered. When Grandma died suddenly from a stroke, I honestly thought my world had ended. I was 18, about to start college, and the woman who raised me was just gone. Grandpa carried both of us through that grief. And somewhere in that darkness, he started really talking to me about his work, about justice, about using power responsibly. That's when I decided to follow in his footsteps. I graduated top of my class from law school. Grandpa was there, absolutely beaming. My parents sent a card, 2 words, "Good job." Yep, that was it. Grandpa used his considerable influence to help me land a prosecutor position. I worked my way up fast. Turns out, I was really good at it. By 30, I was handling high-profile cases, complex financial crimes, corruption, things that made headlines. My parents had no idea. They probably thought I was working some boring office job, if they thought about me at all. Grandpa retired when I was 27. He said he'd done his part, but really, I think he just wanted more time with me while he could. We had dinner every Sunday, sacred. He taught me everything about reading people, courtroom strategy, maintaining integrity when everyone around you is compromised. When he died at 87, peacefully in his sleep, that familiar emptiness returned. But this time, I wasn't a lost 18-year-old. I was 32, and I had become exactly who he raised me to be. The will reading happened 1 week later. I expected maybe some books, his watch, personal items. What I got was everything. The house, his investment portfolio, savings, life insurance, $3 million. Everything he spent decades building, he left to me with one very specific provision in a sealed letter. "My dearest Haley," it began. "You are reading this because I am gone. But my love for you continues. You are the greatest joy of my life. I leave you everything because you earned it. Not through blood, though you are my blood, but through showing up, through loving me and your grandmother when others could not be bothered. Your parents made their choice long ago. This is mine. Be strong, my girl." I cried reading that. Not sad tears, but validation tears. The attorney handed me another envelope. Documentation. Bank statements showing Grandpa gave Diane $3,000 monthly, starting when I was a baby, continuing for over 20 years. More than $800,000 total. Emails from her asking for more. Texts promising to visit, then canceling. Letters from Scott requesting money for failed business ventures. A paper trail of their neglect and their greed. "Your grandfather anticipated they might contest this," the attorney said. "He wanted you armed with proof." Smart man. Because exactly 30 days later, my attorney called. Haley, Diane, and Scott filed a lawsuit, claiming undue influence, saying Grandpa wasn't competent, that I manipulated an old man, that they deserved their share. I actually laughed. I was in court prosecuting a securities fraud case when I got the message. The irony. They assumed I was still that abandoned baby, that I'd be easy to intimidate. They had no idea I'd spent the last decade prosecuting people who thought they were above the law. They had no idea their father-in-law had prepared me for exactly this moment. And they definitely had no idea who Judge Marcus Brennan was. Which brings us back to that courtroom, that moment of recognition. Judge Brennan had been Grandpa's clerk 23 years ago before he became a judge himself. He knew exactly who I was. He knew I was a senior prosecutor. He knew what Grandpa meant to me. And he knew the people suing me were the very same people who couldn't be bothered to visit a dying man. My mother's attorney, some guy named Richard Palmer, who specialized in exploiting emotional arguments when facts weren't on his side, stood up. "Your Honor, before we proceed, I need to disclose that I had a professional relationship with Judge Parker. If either party objects to me hearing this case, speak now." I watched Palmer whisper frantically with my parents. Diane looked nervous. Scott looked annoyed. Finally, Palmer stood. "No objection, Your Honor." "Big mistake." Judge Brennan nodded. "Then let's proceed, Mr. Palmer. Your opening statement." And that's when things got really interesting. Growing up in my grandparents' house was like living in a completely different universe from whatever world my parents inhabited. And honestly, best thing that ever happened to me. My earliest memory is being 4 years old, standing on a stool in Grandma's kitchen, making chocolate chip cookies. She let me pour in way too many chocolate chips. Never got frustrated, just laughed and said the best cookies had extra love and extra chocolate. Grandpa would come home, still wearing his robe sometimes, scoop me up, flour in my hair and all, and ask about my day like I was the most fascinating person alive. I'd tell him about the ants I found or the picture I drew, and he'd listen like I was presenting oral arguments before the Supreme Court. They never badmouthed my parents to me. Not once. When I asked why Mommy and Daddy didn't live with us, Grandma would just say they were busy with important things. I believed that for years. Kids believe what they're told when the people telling them are kind. But I wasn't stupid. I noticed things, how other kids' parents showed up to school events and mine didn't. How friends talked about family game nights while I spent those times with people who went to bed at 8. How birthday cards from Diane and Scott arrived weeks late with messages so generic they could have been written to anyone. The first time I really understood something was wrong, I was 7. Christmas concert at school. I had a solo, 3 whole lines of Rudolph, and I'd practiced for weeks. Grandma and Grandpa sat front row. Grandpa with his video camera, Grandma with flowers from her garden. After the concert, I saw my friend Emma with both her parents taking photos, hugging. I looked at my grandparents and asked why my mommy and daddy didn't come. Grandma's face did this thing where she tried to smile, but her eyes were sad. They wanted to, sweetheart. They just couldn't make it this time. But I'd heard her on the phone the week before, calling Diane about the concert. The silence on the other end. The excuse about Scott's team holiday party. I learned to stop asking after that. Grandpa taught me chess when I was 8. We'd spend Sunday afternoons at the board. Him explaining strategy, teaching me to think 3 moves ahead. He never let me win, which annoyed me initially, but when I finally beat him legitimately at 12, he was so proud he called everyone he knew. Grandma taught me gardening. We had our own section of the yard: tomatoes, peppers, herbs, flowers. She showed me how to tell when soil needed water, how patience and consistent care created beautiful things. I didn't realize until later she was teaching me about life, not just plants. They came to every soccer game, every dance recital, every debate tournament. Grandpa cleared his calendar no matter what case he was hearing. Grandma made elaborate snacks and signs with my name. They cheered louder than any other parents. I used to be embarrassed by their enthusiasm. Now I give anything to hear Grandpa's voice yelling from the sidelines one more time. Diane and Scott made their obligatory appearances. Twice a year, like clockwork. Sometimes they'd show up bearing expensive gifts that felt more like obligations than thoughtfulness. Designer clothes I'd never wear. Electronics I didn't need. Things that said, we spent money, so we fulfilled our duty. I remember one Christmas when I was 10. Diane showed up in a fur coat and diamond earrings, on her phone the entire time, barely looking at me as she handed over a wrapped box. Inside was a tablet. I already had one from Grandpa. When I tried to tell her, she waved dismissively. Well, now you have 2. Give one to a friend. Whatever. Grandma made eye contact with me across the room. Her jaw tightened, but she didn't say anything. She just came over, put her arm around me, and suggested we check on the cookies. In the kitchen, she hugged me tight. Some people show love with presents. Some show love by being present. Both are valid, but one matters more. Scott was even worse. He avoided coming inside. He'd stay in the car, honking until Diane came out. The few times Grandpa convinced him to come in, you could cut the tension with a knife. Grandpa had zero respect for him. That was obvious, and Scott knew it. I remember being 12, overhearing them argue. Scott had just dropped off Diane after a visit. Grandpa met him at the door. One day, that girl is going to be grown, Grandpa said in that quiet voice. That meant he was genuinely angry. And she's going to remember who showed up for her. You still have time to change what she remembers. Scott laughed. Actually laughed. Save the lecture, Your Honor. Diane and I are doing fine. Haley's provided for. That's what matters. Provided for? Grandpa repeated slowly. Is that what you think parenting is? Writing checks. It's more than you did for Diane, Scott shot back. Wrong thing to say. Grandpa's face went hard. I raised my daughter. I was at every game, every recital, every moment. She chose to abandon hers. Don't you dare suggest I'm the failure here. Scott left. Never tried to come inside again. As I got older, visits became even more strained. Diane would come alone most of the time. Scott was busy with failed business ventures, too busy to see his only daughter. I stopped caring around 15. By then, I'd accepted reality. They weren't my parents. They were just people I happened to share DNA with. I tested well in school. Really well. Grandpa reviewed my report cards like they were Supreme Court briefs. Straight A's earned dinner at my favorite restaurant. Winning debate tournaments earned trips to Washington to watch oral arguments at the actual Supreme Court. He made education feel important. When I got into Boston University with a full academic scholarship, Grandma cried happy tears. Diane sent a text, "Good job." 2 words. That was it. College was my first time away from my grandparents. I called every Sunday without fail. Grandma would tell me about her garden, the neighbors, mundane things that felt important because she cared enough to share them. Grandpa would ask about classes, professors, whether I was being challenged enough. Sophomore year, Grandma had the stroke. Massive and sudden. She was planting tulip bulbs when it happened. The neighbor found her. I got the call from Grandpa while in class. His voice was so small, so broken. "She's gone, Haley. She's gone." I drove home that night, 6 hours straight, crying the entire way. When I arrived, Grandpa was sitting in her garden in the dark, holding the tulip bulbs she never finished planting. I sat down next to him. We didn't say anything, just sat there together until the sun came up. Diane came to the funeral. So did Scott. They stayed for the service and left immediately after. Didn't help with arrangements. Didn't help Grandpa sort through Grandma's things. Just showed up long enough to be seen and disappeared again. That's when I stopped making excuses for them. That's when I accepted some people are fundamentally selfish. Grandpa and I learned to live without her. It wasn't the same. Never would be. But we had each other. Those Sunday dinners became sacred. Sometimes he cooked, usually grilled cheese. Sometimes I cooked, experimenting with Grandma's recipes. Sometimes we ordered pizza and ate from the box, watching old movies. The real value wasn't the food, it was the conversation. He started talking to me about his work in ways he never had before. Cases that haunted him. Decisions that kept him awake. The weight of knowing your ruling could change someone's entire life. The law is supposed to be blind, he said one Sunday over Chinese takeout. But the people interpreting it aren't. We bring our experiences, our prejudices, our humanity to every decision. The trick is knowing when your humanity makes you more just and when it makes you biased. I soaked up every word. You're going to be a judge someday, he told me once. I was 23, barely keeping up with law school, but he was serious. You have that thing that can't be taught. Integrity, the ability to see what's right, even when it's not easy, even when it costs you something. After Grandma died, something fundamental shifted between Grandpa and me. We became partners in survival, two people who understood loss and chose to carry it together rather than alone. The house felt emptier without her, but somehow never lonely because we filled it with memories and conversations, and this unspoken understanding that we were all each other had left. Law school was brutal, but I loved it. Every late night studying, every mock trial, every moment I wanted to quit, I thought about Grandpa, about the legacy he was building, not just in courtrooms, but in me. I graduated summa cum laude. He was in the front row, recording everything. My parents weren't there. They sent a card. I stopped being surprised by their absence years earlier. Landing the prosecutor position right out of law school was Grandpa's doing, though I didn't know it then. I thought I earned it purely on merit, strong recommendations, good grades, an impressive interview. Found out later he'd made calls, vouched for me personally, promised I wouldn't waste the opportunity. I didn't. I worked harder than anyone in that office, stayed late, came in early, took cases other prosecutors avoided because they were too complex or politically sensitive. By my second year, I was handling major cases, financial fraud, political corruption, white-collar crime, requiring weeks of document review. I developed a reputation, fast, thorough, prepared, relentless. The work consumed me. 70-hour weeks were normal. I lived on coffee and takeout and the satisfaction of watching guilty people face consequences. My personal life was non-existent. No dating, no drinks with colleagues, no time for anything except work and Sunday dinners with Grandpa. Those dinners remained sacred. No matter how exhausted I was, I showed up, and he never missed one either, even when he was in his 80s and moving slower. Diane called once during this period. I was 28, hadn't spoken to her in 3 years. She wanted help with Scott's legal problem, some business dispute. I asked how she got my number. She said Grandpa gave it to her. Mental note to discuss boundaries. Then I told her I was a criminal prosecutor, not a civil attorney. And even if I wasn't, I wouldn't help Scott with anything. She called me ungrateful. I hung up. Grandpa apologized later. She backed me into a corner, started crying about how her daughter won't speak to her. I should have known better. I wasn't angry. Diane was good at manipulation, always had been. It's fine, I told him, but please don't give her any more information about my life. She lost the right to know those things a long time ago. When I turned 30, Grandpa threw me a small birthday party at the house. Just his closest friends, people I'd grown up knowing. Judge Marcus Brennan was there. He'd been Grandpa's clerk 23 years earlier, gone on to become a respected judge himself. We talked for a long time that night about the law, interesting cases, maintaining ethics in a system that often rewarded compromise. Your grandfather talks about you constantly, he told me. He's incredibly proud of what you've become. My throat tightened. Grandpa rarely expressed pride directly to me, but knowing he told others meant everything. He saved me, I said quietly. Him and my grandmother. They gave me everything. Judge Brennan nodded. He told me about your parents, about how they left you. I'm sorry you went through that. Don't be, I replied. If they'd raised me, I'd probably be a completely different person. And not a better one. Looking back, I don't think I fully appreciated how much Grandpa sacrificed to raise me. He was 55 when I came to live with him permanently. An age when most people plan for easier years ahead. Instead, he got an infant, then a toddler, then a moody teenager. He never complained, just showed up every single day and loved me. Diane resented him for that. I know she did. She saw our relationship and felt threatened somehow, like Grandpa loving me meant he loved her less. She could never understand that love doesn't work that way. You don't have to choose. You can love your daughter and your granddaughter. You can be disappointed in one while being proud of the other. But Diane needed to be the victim in every story. Her parents died when she was 8, so she got sent away. She got pregnant young, so she was trapped. She had to leave me with her parents, so she was persecuted. Never her fault, never her responsibility, always someone else's failure forcing her hand. I used to feel sorry for her when I was younger and still hoping she might become the mother I wanted. But somewhere around 25, that pity hardened into acceptance. She was who she was. She wasn't going to change, and I didn't need her to. Grandpa retired when I was 27. 40 years on the bench. Huge deal. News coverage, retirement parties, tributes from every legal organization in the state. He was gracious about all of it. But I could tell he was ready. Ready to stop carrying other people's problems, ready to just be a person instead of an institution. We talked about travel, Italy, Ireland, Alaska. He had this whole list, but his health started declining slowly. Nothing dramatic. Just 82 years accumulating, fatigue, aches, slower movement. He didn't complain, but I noticed. I started visiting more often, not just Sundays, but weeknights too. I'd bring dinner, make sure he took medications. He protested at first, said I was treating him like he was helpless, but I knew he appreciated it. The house was so quiet without Grandma, without work to fill his days. He needed someone to talk to. We spent evenings talking about everything and nothing. Politics, old cases, people we knew. Sometimes we just sat in comfortable silence, him reading, me reviewing case files. Just being together was enough. You know, he said one night, raising you has been the greatest privilege of my life. I looked up from my papers. His expression was soft, wistful. I mean that. Your grandmother and I got to be parents twice. First with Diane, then with you. And honestly, the second time was better. Maybe because we were older and wiser. Maybe because we knew how fast it goes. Or maybe because you were just an extraordinary kid who made it easy to love you. I felt tears building. You and Grandma saved me. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't stepped in. He shook his head. We didn't save you, Haley. We just loved you. You saved yourself. You decided who you wanted to be despite everything. That was all you. Those conversations are what I miss most. That feeling of being completely known and completely accepted. Having someone who believed in me unconditionally. Not many people get that even once. I got it twice. When Diane occasionally called him, he was always cordial, never badmouthed her to me. But I could hear the disappointment after those calls. The sadness that his daughter had become someone he barely recognized. Someone who called only when she needed something, usually money. He gave it every time. Not because she deserved it, but because he was her father and couldn't help himself. I asked him once why he kept sending her money. She just uses it for stupid things. She doesn't appreciate it. He sighed. I know, but she's still my daughter. And I still have hope that maybe one day she'll figure out what actually matters. It's not the money, Haley, it's the hope. Palmer's opening statement in court was a masterclass in fiction. And look, I've prosecuted enough liars to recognize talent when I see it. The man was good. He painted Diane as this devoted daughter, cruelly separated from her loving father by manipulative grandparents who poisoned the relationship. He described me as calculating, someone who isolated an elderly man and positioned herself as his sole caregiver to secure an inheritance. Judge Parker was suffering from profound grief after losing his wife of 60 years, Palmer argued, his voice dripping with synthetic sympathy. He was vulnerable, depressed, and the defendant exploited that vulnerability. She manipulated him into believing she was the only one who cared. This will doesn't reflect Judge Parker's true wishes. It reflects Haley Morrison's calculated campaign to inherit his wealth. I kept my face neutral, but inside I was cataloging every distortion for the cross-examination to come. Thomas stood for our opening. He didn't need dramatics. The facts were damning enough. Your Honor, this case is simple. Judge Parker was brilliant, careful, and intentional. He left his estate to the person who earned it through 32 years of consistent love and presence. The evidence will show the plaintiffs received over $800,000 from him during his lifetime while barely maintaining contact. Meanwhile, Haley Morrison showed up every single day. Judge Brennan looked at Palmer. Call your first witness. The plaintiff calls Diane Morrison. My mother stood, smoothing her conservative black dress. She dressed for sympathy. Minimal makeup, hair pulled back. She looked like the grieving daughter, almost convincing if you didn't know better. She took the oath and sat down. Palmer approached with practiced gentleness. Mrs. Morrison, describe your relationship with your father. Diane's voice wavered. He was everything to me, my hero. When my parents died in a car accident when I was 8, he and my grandmother took me in, raised me, gave me a home. True so far, but convenient omissions were coming. And when you had Haley, what was your father's involvement? He was so excited to be a grandfather, Diane said, dabbing at her eyes. Where did that tissue come from? Was she carrying it specifically for this performance? I was so young, just 18, still figuring out my life. When he offered to watch Haley while Scott and I got established, I thought it was temporary. Temporary. Interesting spin. Palmer nodded sympathetically. But it became permanent? Yes, Diane said, voice breaking. They kept her. Made it seem like Scott and I were bad parents for wanting careers. Made me feel guilty every time I couldn't visit. They turned my daughter against me. I kept my expression blank, but mentally I was shredding every word. Thomas glanced at me. I gave a slight nod. I was fine. Let her dig herself deeper. After your mother passed away, did your relationship with your father change? Palmer continued. He withdrew, Diane said. Became cold. Blamed me somehow for not being there enough. But I tried. I called. I visited when I could. He pushed me away and held Haley closer. Judge Brennan was taking notes, expression unreadable. When did you learn about the will? After the funeral, Diane said. I was grieving, and then I found out he left me nothing. Cut off the monthly support he'd been giving me. Gave everything to Haley. I was devastated. It felt like a final rejection. Palmer turned to the judge. We contend Judge Parker was unduly influenced by the defendant, that she isolated him, manipulated him when he was vulnerable. This will doesn't reflect his true intentions. Objection. Counsel is testifying, Thomas stood. Sustained, Judge Brennan said. Ask questions, Mr. Palmer. No further questions. Judge Brennan looked at Thomas. Cross-examination. Yes, Your Honor. Thomas stood and approached my mother without smiling. Professional, direct, deadly. Mrs. Morrison, you were 18 when Haley was born? Yes. And you voluntarily left her with your parents when she was 3 months old? It wasn't like, yes or no. Yes, but thank you. Thomas pulled out a large calendar. Your father kept meticulous records. According to this, you visited 4 times in Haley's first year, Christmas, Easter, her first birthday, and 1 random Saturday in July. Accurate. Diane's face flushed. I was dealing with a lot. I was young. I was trying to support Scott's career. Of course. Let's discuss that. Your husband was a professional hockey player making substantial money. Correct? Yes. According to tax records, he made over $2 million during his career. Yet you still required monthly financial assistance from your father. We had expenses. Expenses that $2 million couldn't cover? Thomas pulled out bank statements. Your father gave you $3,000 monthly starting when Haley was an infant, continuing for over 20 years. That's over $800,000, Mrs. Morrison. What was that money used for? Palmer stood. Objection. Relevance. The plaintiffs claim they deserve a share of the estate. I'm establishing what they already received, Thomas argued. Overruled. Answer the question. Diane shifted uncomfortably. Living expenses, rent, food, normal things. Did you work during this time? Occasionally. Retail jobs. And your husband? He tried several businesses after hockey ended. Tried, Thomas repeated. A sports bar that lasted 11 months. A coaching company with 0 clients. A memorabilia shop that filed bankruptcy within 2 years. Each time one failed, your father gave additional money beyond the monthly allowance. Correct? He wanted to help, Diane said weakly. He wanted to help you become independent, Thomas corrected. But you became dependent instead. In the last 10 years of his life, how many times did you see your father? I don't know. Several times. Thomas pulled out another document. According to his calendar, 8 times in 10 years. Less than once a year. The courtroom was silent. And you call this devoted daughter behavior? I was busy. I had my own life, Diane protested. Your own life, Thomas echoed. Did that include calling him on his birthday? Silence. I'll take that as no. Father's Day, Christmas. Cards, gifts sometimes, Diane whispered. Sometimes, Mrs. Morrison. When was the last time you saw your father before he died? Long silence. I don't remember exactly. It was his 84th birthday, 3 years before his death. You came for 90 minutes. Left before cake. Didn't see him again until the funeral. Correct? I think so. Yes. Thomas let that sink in. One final question. You testified your father pushed you away after your mother died. But isn't it true you stopped coming around when he stopped giving extra money beyond the monthly allowance? That's when he retired and told you monthly payments would continue, but extra funds would stop. You visited exactly 0 times in the following 3 years. True or false? He was angry with me. Or you had no use for him anymore? Thomas said quietly. No further questions. Scott took the stand next and somehow managed to look even less invested than usual. He fidgeted in his suit like a kid forced to attend church. Palmer started with softballs. Mr. Morrison, describe your relationship with Judge Parker. We got along fine, Scott said. Translation, they tolerated each other for approximately 90 seconds at a time. Didn't see each other much because of hockey, lots of travel, but I respected him. Respected him. That's rich coming from someone who avoided entering the man's house for 2 decades. Palmer walked him through the same victim narrative, how they tried to be involved, how Grandpa made it difficult, how they felt pushed out. Scott was less convincing than Diane. He kept glancing at the clock like he had somewhere better to be. This was an inconvenience. That much was obvious to everyone. Thomas's cross-examination was surgical. Mr. Morrison, you said you wanted to be involved in Haley's life. Yes. How many of her school events did you attend? Scott blinked. I don't know. Several. Can you name one? Silence. Scott looked at Palmer, who couldn't help him. I was traveling a lot. Your hockey career ended when Haley was 8. After that, you lived 2 hours away. How often did you see her? We had visits. How many? Thomas pressed. I'm asking for a number. I don't remember exactly. Would it surprise you that, according to Haley's recollection, you came inside Judge Parker's house fewer than 5 times in 24 years? That you mostly stayed in the car? Scott's jaw tightened. That house was tense. Judge Parker didn't like me. Why didn't he like you? I don't know. He was judgmental. Or perhaps, Thomas said, pulling out more documents, he judged you for abandoning your daughter and then asking him for money when your businesses failed. Let's discuss those failures. 3 ventures, 3 bankruptcies. Each time you asked Judge Parker for financial help, correct? He offered after you asked, Thomas interrupted. And he gave you money despite barely tolerating you. Why? Because he loved his daughter and wanted to help her even when she married someone he didn't respect, even when that person never showed up for his granddaughter. And now you're claiming you deserve more. Scott's face reddened. We're family. We deserve something. Family, Thomas said slowly. When Haley graduated high school, did you attend? I think so. You think so? Thomas projected a photograph on the screen. This is from her graduation. There's Judge Parker, front row. There's her grandmother. Where are you, Mr. Morrison? I might have had something. You didn't come. You missed her college graduation, her law school graduation, every significant moment. And now you want half of the estate earned by the man who actually showed up. Palmer stood. Objection. Argumentative. Sustained, Judge Brennan said. Move on. Thomas nodded. No further questions. Palmer's next witness surprised me. Dr. Raymond Hughes, a psychiatrist who'd never met Grandpa. They were actually trying the incompetence angle. Bold move considering how many people could testify otherwise. Dr. Hughes, based on medical records, can you speak to Judge Parker's mental state in his final year? Based on the records, Judge Parker showed signs of depression following his wife's death. Depression in elderly patients can lead to impaired judgment, particularly regarding relationships and financial decisions. So, he could have been unduly influenced? It's possible. Elderly individuals experiencing grief-related depression are vulnerable to suggestion, especially from caregivers they see regularly. Thomas stood for cross. Dr. Hughes, you never met Judge Parker, correct? No, never evaluated him, spoke to him, observed him in any capacity? I'm basing my opinion on medical records. Medical records showing standard checkups with normal results for a man his age? Yes, but the depression. Where in these records is depression diagnosed? Dr. Hughes flipped through papers. It's not explicitly stated, but given the circumstances, so you diagnosed a man you never met with a condition not present in his medical records and used that imaginary diagnosis to question his mental competency? I'm offering a professional opinion based on nothing, Thomas said. No further questions. Palmer looked flustered. He called a neighbor who said Grandpa seemed withdrawn in his final years and a distant cousin who claimed Grandpa once said he wished Diane visited more. Neither testimony helped their case much. Then it was our turn. Thomas called Judge Andrew Mitchell, who'd served on the Supreme Court with Grandpa. Judge Mitchell, you worked with Judge Parker for over 20 years. Did you observe any decline in his mental faculties? Absolutely not, Judge Mitchell said firmly. William was sharp until the end. We had lunch regularly, discussed complex legal theories, debated current cases. His mind was as clear at 87 as at 60. Did he discuss his estate plans? Yes. He told me he was leaving everything to Haley. Said she earned it through years of devotion. He was very clear. No confusion, no coercion, just a father making sure the person who actually cared for him was taken care of. Thomas called 3 more witnesses, all close friends. All testified to Grandpa's mental sharpness. All confirmed he discussed his will openly and was completely intentional. Then Thomas called the attorney who drafted Grandpa's will. Margaret Chin had been his estate attorney for 30 years. Ms. Chin walked us through creating Judge Parker's final will. He contacted me 2 years before his death. Wanted to update everything. We met multiple times. He was very specific. Wanted Haley to inherit everything. Wanted Diane's monthly allowance ended. He anticipated this might be contested. So he included language affirming his sound mind and clear intentions. Did he seem confused or coerced? Not at all. He was methodical. Brought documentation to support his decisions. Wanted no ambiguities. What kind of documentation? Records of financial support he'd given Diane over the years. Calendars showing visit frequency. He wanted to ensure if this went to court, the truth would be clear. Palmer had nothing on cross. Margaret Chin was unshakable. As court recessed for the day, I caught my mother's eye. She looked away quickly. Good. She should be uncomfortable. Tomorrow I would testify. Tomorrow I'd finally say everything I'd wanted to say for 32 years, under oath, on the record, with a judge who knew the truth. I woke up early, nerves humming, but not from fear, from anticipation. Today I'd finally tell my truth, and they'd have to sit there and listen. Under oath, on record, with a judge who understood. I dressed carefully. Navy suit, simple jewelry, hair pulled back. Professional. Credible. Someone who earned every penny. Thomas met me at the courthouse. You ready? More than ready. Remember, just tell the truth. Don't let Palmer get under your skin. I smiled. I prosecute criminals for a living, Thomas. I know how to handle hostile questioning. Fair enough, he laughed. Let's go. The courtroom filled quickly. Word had spread. Grandpa had been well known. People were curious. Judge Brennan took the bench. Mr. Goldstein, call your next witness. Thomas stood. The defense calls Haley Morrison. I walked to the stand, raised my right hand, swore to tell the truth. Finally, Thomas started gently. Haley, tell the court about your childhood. I took a breath. I was born when my mother was 18. She and my father decided they weren't ready for parenthood. When I was 3 months old, they brought me to my grandparents. What was supposed to be temporary became permanent. They left and rarely returned. How often did they visit when you were young? Maybe 3 or 4 times yearly. As I got older, less. By my teens, twice a year if lucky, Christmas and sometimes my birthday. My father even less. How did that affect you? I learned early I couldn't count on them. But I had my grandparents. They showed up to everything. School plays, soccer games, debate tournaments. They helped with homework. Taught me to cook. Took me to museums. They were my parents in every way that mattered. Did Diane and Scott contribute financially? No. My grandparents paid for everything. Clothes, school supplies, college, law school, everything. Diane and Scott took money from my grandfather, but never gave anything. Thomas walked me through my entire childhood. Every missed event, every broken promise, every unanswered call. The Christmas Diane spent on her phone. The Father's Day Scott didn't answer for 3 days. I kept my voice steady, factual, not asking for sympathy, just establishing a pattern. When your grandmother died, what happened? I took a semester off college to be with my grandfather. He was devastated. 60 years of marriage. I couldn't leave him alone. Did your mother help? She came to the funeral, left immediately after. Didn't help with arrangements, didn't check on him afterward. I moved home for 6 months to make sure he was okay. And after, we grew closer. I called every day, visited every Sunday for dinner. When he retired, we spent even more time together. He mentored me in my career, taught me everything about the law. He was my grandfather and my best friend. My voice caught slightly. I cleared my throat. When did you learn about the will? At the reading, a week after he died. I was shocked. I expected personal items. Had no idea he'd accumulated that much. Certainly didn't know he planned to leave it all to me. Did you ever discuss the will with him? Never. He never told me his plans. I think he wanted me to love him without ulterior motive, which I did. What would you say to the accusation you manipulated him? I looked directly at my mother. I spent 3 decades showing up. I didn't manipulate him. I loved him. There's a difference. Thomas sat down. Now came Palmer's cross-examination. He stood slowly, that look attorneys get when they think they've found an angle. Miss Morrison, you testified you saw your parents rarely, but couldn't you have reached out more? Tried harder? I was a child for most of that time, I replied calmly. Children don't arrange visits. Parents do. But as an adult? As an adult, I realized they weren't interested. They called only when needing money, showed up only when convenient. I stopped chasing people who didn't want to be caught. Palmer paced. You paint yourself as devoted, but isn't it possible you isolated your grandfather from his daughter? Made yourself indispensable so he'd leave you his money. I didn't need to isolate him. They isolated themselves. My grandfather made his own decisions based on who actually showed up for him. You were ambitious. Went to law school, became a prosecutor, all with his help, his connections. Weren't you using him to advance your career? I kept my expression neutral despite simmering anger. My grandfather mentored me because he wanted to, because he was proud of me, because watching me succeed gave him joy. That's not manipulation. That's family. Palmer tried different angles. Suggested I poison Grandpa against Diane. Suggested I kept Diane away deliberately. Suggested I convinced Grandpa to cut her off. I shut down every attempt with calm, factual responses. Isn't it true you benefited financially from your relationship with him? Palmer tried. In what way? He paid for your education, living expenses, everything. Yes, because I was his granddaughter and he wanted to. Just like he gave my mother over $800,000 over 20 plus years. The difference? I was actually present in his life. I didn't just take his money. I gave him my time, my love, my company. What did you give him? Objection, Palmer shouted. Argumentative. Sustained, Judge Brennan said, but the point was made. Palmer tried to regain control. Let's talk about his final year. You visited frequently, some might say too frequently. Were you checking his mental state, making sure he didn't change the will? I visited because I loved him, and he was alone. If I'd cared about the will, I would have asked about it. I never did. He made his decisions without any input from me. How convenient, Palmer sneered. Ms. Morrison, isn't it true you knew exactly what you'd inherit, that you spent years positioning yourself for this moment? I leaned forward slightly. Mr. Palmer, I spent years loving my grandfather. If inheritance was my motivation, I wasted a lot of time. I could have been building my own wealth instead of having dinner with an old man every Sunday. But I chose him because he was worth more than any amount of money. Something your clients never understood. Palmer's face reddened. No further questions. I stepped down and returned to my seat. Thomas leaned over. You did great. I nodded, focused on my mother. She was crying. Actual tears. Genuine remorse or realizing she was losing. Hard to tell with Diane. Judge Brennan looked at both attorneys. Anything else? Thomas stood. One more piece of evidence, Your Honor. He projected images on the screen. Photographs from my childhood. Grandpa at my soccer games. Grandma at my recital. Me and Grandpa at graduations. Every major moment documented. Notice who's missing, Thomas said. Diane and Scott Morrison. Not because they were excluded, but because they chose not to be there. Then financial records. Every payment to Diane, every excuse for needing more money, every promise to visit that she broke. The evidence was overwhelming. Judge Brennan studied everything carefully. I've seen enough, he finally said. We'll recess until tomorrow for closing arguments and ruling. As we left, I felt lighter. I'd said everything I needed. The truth was out. Now we just waited for justice. Closing arguments were scheduled for 9 a.m. I barely slept, but not from worry, from anticipation. This was almost over. One way or another, by tomorrow, I'd know whether Grandpa's wishes would be honored, or whether my parents would successfully rewrite history. The courtroom was packed when we arrived. Estate disputes weren't usually this interesting, but add a prominent judge, a prosecutor granddaughter, and decades of family dysfunction, and suddenly everyone wants front row seats. Judge Brennan took the bench exactly on time. Mr. Palmer, your closing argument. Palmer stood and launched into his final appeal. He talked about blood being thicker than water, about how Diane was Grandpa's daughter and deserved consideration. About how I was just the granddaughter, as if love and loyalty ranked lower because of generational gaps. Judge Parker was a man suffering from profound grief, Palmer argued. He lost his wife of 60 years. He was vulnerable, depressed, susceptible to influence. The defendant took advantage of that vulnerability. She isolated him from his daughter. She positioned herself as his sole caregiver. She manipulated him into believing she was the only one who cared. This will is not a reflection of Judge Parker's true wishes. It's a reflection of Haley Morrison's calculated campaign to inherit his wealth. He went on like that for 20 minutes, building a narrative that had no basis in reality, but sounded convincing if you didn't know the facts. When he sat down, Thomas stood. He didn't need dramatic flair. The facts spoke loudly enough. Your Honor, this case is actually very simple. Judge Parker was a brilliant legal mind who spent 40 years making carefully considered decisions. His will was no different. He left his estate to the person who earned it, not through manipulation, but through decades of consistent love and presence. Thomas walked the judge through the evidence methodically. The documentation of Diane's neglect. Financial records showing she took hundreds of thousands while giving nothing. Testimony from Grandpa's colleagues confirming his mental clarity. The calendar proving the Morrisons' absence. The plaintiffs claim Judge Parker was unduly influenced, but the evidence shows he was simply making logical choices based on observed behavior. He gave his daughter every opportunity, every chance to be present, every benefit of the doubt. She failed to show up. Haley Morrison did show up every single day. That's not manipulation. That's devotion. Thomas paused, then made a risky move. Your Honor, you knew Judge Parker. You clerked for him. You saw his character, his integrity. Do you believe he was the type of man who could be manipulated by his granddaughter? Or was he the type of man who made decisions based on principles and observation? It was risky, bringing the judge's personal knowledge into it. But Palmer had opened that door when he didn't object to Judge Brennan hearing the case. Judge Brennan's expression remained neutral. The court will take a brief recess to review the evidence and render a decision. We stood as he left. I looked at my parents. Scott looked bored, checking his phone like he was waiting for a dentist appointment. Diane looked anxious. Her earlier courtroom tears replaced with genuine worry. She should be worried. 30 minutes felt like 3 hours. Finally, the bailiff called us back. Judge Brennan returned with a thick folder. My heart pounded. This was it. I have reviewed all evidence and testimony carefully, he began. This is a difficult case because it involves family relationships, which are complicated and often painful. However, my role is not to judge the quality of these relationships. My role is to determine whether Judge Parker's will should stand as written. He looked directly at my parents. The plaintiffs argue that Judge Parker was unduly influenced and mentally incompetent. The evidence does not support either claim. Multiple witnesses testified to his mental clarity. His medical records show no cognitive decline. His attorney confirmed he was methodical and intentional in his estate planning. The claim of undue influence requires proof that someone controlled or manipulated the testator's decisions. The evidence shows the opposite. Judge Parker made his decisions independently, based on years of observation. Diane was crying again. Scott looked angry now, finally paying attention. Judge Brennan continued, what the evidence does show is a pattern of absence by the plaintiffs and presence by the defendant. A pattern of financial taking by the plaintiffs and financial responsibility by the defendant. A pattern of broken promises by the plaintiffs and kept commitments by the defendant. Judge Parker didn't need to be manipulated into seeing this pattern. He lived it for 32 years. My chest tightened. This was it. The court finds that Judge Parker's will reflects his true intentions, that he had testamentary capacity, that there was no undue influence. The will stands as written. The plaintiff's petition is denied. Diane let out a sob. Scott swore under his breath, but Judge Brennan wasn't finished. Furthermore, I am awarding attorney's fees to the defendant. The plaintiffs brought this case without merit, causing unnecessary expense and emotional distress. They will bear the costs of this litigation. Palmer stood quickly. Your Honor, we respectfully request. My ruling stands, Counselor. The gavel came down with a sharp crack that echoed through the silent courtroom. We're adjourned. It was over. Just like that. 32 years of neglect couldn't be erased by a lawsuit. 32 years of love couldn't be invalidated by greed. Grandpa's final wishes would be honored. And better yet, my parents would have to pay for the privilege of losing. Thomas shook my hand. Congratulations, Haley. I nodded, unable to speak past the emotion clogging my throat. As we gathered our materials, my mother approached, mascara streaking her face. Haley, please. Can we talk? I looked at her. Really looked at her. She was crying, makeup smeared, looking older than her 50 years. For a moment, I almost felt something. Not sympathy exactly, more like pity. There's nothing to talk about, Diane. I'm your mother, she said desperately, reaching for my arm. I stepped back. You're the woman who gave birth to me. My mother was Helen Parker. My father was William Parker. They earned those titles by showing up. You're just Diane, a stranger who took my grandfather's money for 30 years and now wants more. Please, she whispered. I made mistakes, but I'm still your mother. No, I said firmly. You had every chance to be my mother. Every birthday, every Christmas, every Sunday for 32 years, you chose not to show up. You don't get to claim that title now just because there's money involved. She tried again to reach for me. I stepped back further. Don't contact me again. Don't call. Don't show up at my house. Don't send letters or emails. We're done. We've been done since I was 3 months old. This just makes it official. I walked out of the courtroom with Thomas. Behind me, I heard Diane sobbing, Scott's angry voice telling her to pull herself together. But I didn't look back. Not once. For the first time in my life, I felt completely free. Free from hoping they'd change. Free from wondering if I was enough. Free from carrying the weight of their failures. Grandpa had given me one last gift. He'd proved I wasn't wrong. That love matters more than blood. That showing up matters more than showing off. That I deserved everything I received because I earned it through years of simple, consistent presence. The first thing I did after leaving the courthouse was visit Grandpa's grave. I sat on the grass next to his headstone, next to Grandma's. The tulips I'd planted months ago were blooming. We won, I said quietly. They tried to take it, tried to rewrite history, but the truth came out. Your wishes will be honored. The wind rustled through the trees. I like to think it was him acknowledging me, letting me know he was proud, that he knew I'd fight for him the way he always fought for me. I stayed there for a long time, crying a little, laughing a little, thanking them both for saving me when my parents couldn't be bothered, promising to honor their legacy, to use the inheritance wisely, to live the kind of life they'd be proud of. As the sun set, I finally stood to leave, but not before planting more tulip bulbs around their headstones. A reminder that love endures, that it grows back every spring, that it survives even when the people we love are gone. I drove home that night feeling lighter than I had in months. Justice had been served, the truth had prevailed, and I could finally move forward without looking back. Or so I thought, because life had a few more surprises in store. 6 months after the verdict, life had settled into a new rhythm. Work, gym, occasionally meeting friends for dinner, mostly just existing in the space I'd created for myself. The inheritance sat safely invested, growing quietly while I continued working, because the work mattered more than the money ever could. Then one Saturday morning, my doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. Through the peephole, I saw a woman in her 60s I didn't recognize. I opened the door cautiously. "Can I help you?" "Haley Morrison," she asked. "Yes, I'm Patricia Caldwell. I was your grandfather's neighbor for 30 years. I remembered her vaguely. The woman who'd found Grandma after the stroke. "Of course. Please come in." She followed me inside, clutching a large envelope. I should have come sooner, but I wasn't sure if it was my place. After the trial, though, I felt like you needed to see this. She handed me the envelope. Inside were letters, dozens of them, all in Grandpa's handwriting, addressed to Diane, but never sent. I found them when I helped clean out his study after he died, Patricia explained. Your grandfather asked me to help sort his papers. These were in a drawer marked unsent. I read a few. I hope you don't mind, but I needed to know what they were before giving them to you. I pulled out the first letter, dated 20 years ago. Dear Diane, it began. I'm writing this because I can't seem to say it to your face without anger creeping in. Haley had her dance recital today. She was wonderful. She kept looking at the audience, searching for you. I watched her face fall when she realized you weren't there. How many more times will I have to watch my granddaughter's heart break because you can't be bothered to show up? I read through more letters, each one documenting another missed moment, another broken promise. Another attempt by Grandpa to understand why his daughter had become someone he didn't recognize. Some were angry, some were sad. All were heartbreaking. One letter, dated just 2 years before his death, stood out. Diane, I've given you over $600,000 over the past 20 years. I told myself it was helping you get stable, helping you build a life, but I'm starting to realize I'm just enabling your refusal to grow up. I'm going to continue the monthly payments because you're my daughter and I can't completely cut you off, but I'm done with the extra money. I'm done rescuing Scott from his failures. I'm done pretending this is help when it's really just prolonging your dependence. I hope someday you'll understand that the greatest gift I ever gave you wasn't money. It was Haley. You gave her to me and she saved me after your mother died. She gave my life purpose again. I just wish you could see what I see when I look at her. I wish you could see what you're missing. I set the letters down, tears streaming. Patricia handed me a tissue. "I thought you should know," she said quietly. "He loved you so much. And he never stopped hoping Diane would change even though he knew she wouldn't." "Why didn't he send these?" I asked. "I think he needed to write them, but knew they wouldn't change anything. Your mother was who she was. He accepted that even if he didn't like it." After Patricia left, I spent hours reading through every letter. They were a chronicle of Grandpa's internal struggle between loving his daughter and accepting her limitations, between wanting to help and recognizing when help became enabling. The letters also revealed something else: how much joy I brought him. How proud he was of every accomplishment, how grateful he felt that Diane's failure as a mother gave him a second chance at parenthood. "I feel guilty sometimes," one letter read. "Guilty that I'm glad she left you with us. Guilty that her absence gave me something precious. But I can't regret having you in my life, Haley. You are the greatest gift I never asked for." I called Thomas. I found letters. Grandpa wrote to Diane, but never sent them. What did they say? Everything we proved in court, but more personal, more raw. Thomas, he documented everything, not just for legal purposes. He documented it to make sense of it himself. "That sounds like him," Thomas said. "Methodical, even in his pain." "Should I show them to Diane?" I asked. "Why would you?" "I don't know. Maybe so she understands how much she hurt him, how much she missed." Thomas was quiet for a moment. "Haley, she already knows. Deep down she knows. Showing her these letters won't change anything. It'll just make you feel like you need to manage her guilt. That's not your job." He was right. Diane's guilt was hers to carry, not mine to ease. I kept the letters for myself, added them to the box of Grandpa's things I'd saved. They were proof of his love, his struggle, his ultimate choice to prioritize the person who prioritized him. A week later, I ran into Judge Brennan at a legal conference. "Haley," he greeted me warmly. "How are you holding up?" "I'm good," I said honestly. "Really good." "I'm glad. That trial was difficult but necessary. Your grandfather would have been proud of how you handled yourself." "Judge Brennan, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Did you ever talk to Grandpa about Diane? About the situation?" He nodded slowly. "Many times. He struggled with it. Loved her, but didn't like who she'd become. He felt guilty about that too. Like he'd failed as a father." "He didn't fail," I said firmly. "He did everything right. She just made different choices." "I told him that exact thing," Judge Brennan replied, multiple times. "But parents carry guilt in ways we can't always understand. The important thing is he never let that guilt override his judgment. He saw clearly who deserved what. That's why his will stood up in court. It was based on observation and facts, not emotion." That conversation stuck with me. Grandpa had struggled more than I realized, but in the end, he'd made the right choice. Not the easy choice, the right one. That night, I drafted my own will. I was only 32, but the trial had taught me the importance of clear documentation. I left everything to charities Grandpa had supported: education funds, legal aid, programs for vulnerable children. Nothing to Diane or Scott, not out of spite, but because they'd already taken enough. I also wrote a letter to be opened after my death explaining my reasoning, just like Grandpa had done. Not because I owed anyone an explanation, but because I wanted the record clear. I wanted future people to understand that my choices were intentional, based on principles and observation, not manipulation or bitterness. The months continued passing. Seasons changed. Life moved forward. I became senior prosecutor in my division. Started mentoring younger attorneys. Maintained the Sunday dinner tradition, though now with friends instead of Grandpa. Different, but still sacred. And slowly, very slowly, I began to feel like myself again. Not the person defined by absent parents or devoted grandparents. Just me, Haley. Building a life on my own terms. 1 year after the verdict, something unexpected happened. I was offered a judgeship. At 33, I'd be one of the youngest people ever appointed to the bench in our state. The governor's office called me personally. "Your record is exceptional," the governor said. "Your grandfather would be proud." He would have told me I was too young, I replied, honestly, that I needed more experience. "Maybe, but we think you're ready." Will you accept? I thought about it for exactly 10 seconds. Yes, I accept. The appointment process was intense. Background checks, interviews, public hearings. During one hearing, someone asked about the lawsuit. Miss Morrison, you were involved in contentious litigation with your parents over your grandfather's estate. Some people question whether that demonstrates a lack of family values. How do you respond? I looked directly at the questioner. I respond that family values means valuing the people who show up for you. My grandparents demonstrated true family values by raising a child that wasn't their responsibility. They showed up to every event, supported every goal, loved unconditionally. That's family values. My biological parents demonstrated the opposite. The lawsuit wasn't about money. It was about honoring the wishes of a man who earned respect through 40 years of judicial service and 32 years of devoted grandparenting. The room was silent. Then someone started clapping. Others joined. The appointment went through. Judge Haley Morrison. Grandpa's legacy continued. On my first day on the bench, I wore his judicial robe. The clerks had found it in storage, cleaned and pressed it for me. It was too big, hung off my shoulders, but I didn't care. It felt like he was there with me. My first case was a child custody dispute. Parents fighting over a 5-year-old, both claiming the other was unfit. As I listened to testimony, I saw myself in that child, caught between adults making decisions based on pride and anger rather than love. When it came time for my ruling, I spoke directly to both parents. This child didn't ask to be born into your conflict. This child deserves parents who show up, who put her needs before their own egos, who understand that love is demonstrated through action, not claimed through biology. I'm ordering joint custody with mandatory co-parenting counseling. And I'm appointing a child advocate to ensure this child's voice is heard, because children remember who showed up for them. They remember who made them feel safe. They remember everything. Make sure what they remember is love, not war. After the hearing, my clerk said, "That was powerful, Judge Morrison." It was personal, I admitted, but true. Word spread about the new judge who didn't tolerate parental selfishness. My docket filled with family law cases, estate disputes, custody battles. I brought the same principles to every decision. Actions matter, presence matters, consistency matters. Biology doesn't guarantee anything. 6 months into my judgeship, an estate case came before me. Adult children contesting their father's will that left everything to his longtime caregiver. The facts were remarkably similar to my own case. The children claimed undue influence. The caregiver claimed she earned it through years of devoted care while the children were absent. I had to recuse myself, too similar to my own situation. But before I did, I called both attorneys into chambers. I'm recusing from this case because of personal experience with similar facts. But I'll tell you both this. Make sure your evidence shows pattern, not just isolated incidents. Show the court who is consistently present. That's what matters. Not biology, not expectations. Presence. The case went to another judge who ruled exactly as I would have. The caregiver won. The children lost. Actions had consequences. As years passed, I developed a reputation. Judge Morrison was fair but firm. She didn't tolerate manipulation. She valued truth over convenience. She protected children and vulnerable people. She made decisions based on evidence, not emotion. 3 years into my judgeship, I got a call from an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. It was Scott. "Haley, I need to talk to you." "About what?" "About Diane. She's sick. Heart problems. She's asking for you." "How sick?" "Doctors say months, maybe a year." I absorbed that information without emotion. "I'm sorry she's unwell, but I won't be visiting." "She's your mother." "No, she's not. We've been over this. She made her choices. I've made mine. She has regrets. I'm sure she does. Regret is easy when you're facing consequences. Tell her I hope she finds peace, but I won't be part of that process." "You really are cold," Scott said. "I'm honest. There's a difference." "Goodbye, Scott." I hung up and blocked the number. Did I feel guilty? A little, but guilt doesn't obligate me to anything. She had 33 years to build a relationship with me. She chose not to. Her illness didn't erase that history. Work continued. Cases came and went. I made decisions that affected people's lives. Always thinking about Grandpa, about his principles, about doing what was right rather than what was easy. 5 years after taking the bench, word came that Diane had died. Scott sent a brief email. No details. Just thought you should know. I read it once and deleted it. I didn't attend the funeral. Didn't send flowers. Didn't reach out to Scott. She was a stranger who happened to give birth to me. Her death didn't change anything. People at work who knew my story asked if I was okay. I'm fine, I said. Honestly, she wasn't part of my life. Her death doesn't change that. Some thought I was heartless, others understood. I didn't care either way. I knew my truth. I knew what I'd lived through. I knew who showed up and who didn't. That was enough. 6 months after Diane's death, I was nominated for the state Supreme Court. At 38, I'd be one of the youngest justices in history. The confirmation hearings were brutal. Every decision scrutinized, every word analyzed. And of course, someone brought up my parents. Justice Morrison, your mother died last year. Some senators are concerned that you showed no compassion. Didn't even attend her funeral. How do you respond? I looked directly at the senator. I respond that compassion must be earned. My mother had 38 years to build a relationship with me. She chose not to. Her death was sad in the universal sense that any death is sad. But I didn't grieve a mother I never had. That's not lack of compassion. That's honesty. But she gave birth to you. Doesn't that deserve something? Senator, giving birth is biology. Being a mother is action. She did one, not the other. I honored the people who actually mothered me. My grandmother raised me. She earned that title. Diane Morrison never did. The confirmation went through. Justice Haley Morrison. Taking Grandpa's seat on the Supreme Court. The circle complete. My first year on the Supreme Court was everything I hoped it would be. Complex cases, real impact, the ability to shape law in ways that mattered. I wrote opinions on parental rights, elder abuse, estate law. Every case informed by my own experience, but grounded in precedent and principle. One opinion became particularly influential. A case about terminating parental rights where the parents claimed they deserved another chance despite years of neglect. I wrote, parental rights are not absolute. They must be earned through consistent action, not claimed through biology alone. A parent who fails to appear, to support, to love their child forfeits the right to that title. The child's welfare supersedes the parent's desires. Critics said I was letting personal experience cloud judgment. Supporters said I was finally prioritizing children's needs over parents' feelings. I said I was just telling the truth. That opinion changed how courts in our state viewed parental rights cases. It gave judges a framework to prioritize children without guilt. 2 years into my tenure on the court, I got an unexpected package. Inside was a small jewelry box and a note from someone I didn't recognize. Found this in Scott Morrison's belongings after he passed. Thought you might want it. Scott was dead. I felt nothing. The box contained Diane's wedding ring. A simple gold band. I stared at it for a long moment, then put it in a drawer and never looked at it again. 10 years after Grandpa died, I was invited to give a speech at the law school. They wanted me to talk about my career, about being on the Supreme Court, about cases I'd worked. I agreed. But as I prepared, I realized I wanted to say something different, something about family, about love, about the difference between biology and belonging. The auditorium was packed with law students, young faces looking to learn about success. I stood at the podium and set aside my prepared remarks. I'm Justice Haley Morrison. I sit on the state Supreme Court, in the seat my grandfather once held. But that's not what I want to talk about today. I want to talk about who raised me. I told them the story, the real one. About being abandoned as a baby. About grandparents who didn't have to choose me, but did. About learning that family is built through action. About the will, the lawsuit, the trial. About standing up for the people who stood up for me. My grandfather left me everything he had, I said, not because I manipulated him, but because I showed up every day for 32 years. And when people questioned whether I deserved that inheritance, I had to prove it. I had to show that love and presence matter more than bloodlines. The students were silent, listening. Here's what I learned. Success isn't just about your career. It's about your integrity. It's about showing up consistently, especially when it's hard. It's about honoring the people who invest in you by becoming someone worthy of that investment. I could have taken the money and walked away, gone into private practice, made millions. But that's not what my grandfather would have wanted. He wanted me to use everything he gave me to make a difference. So, I stayed in public service. I work long hours. I see difficult cases. But I also get to hold people accountable. I get to stand up for people who need someone in their corner. That's the legacy my grandfather left me. Not the money, but the purpose. The speech got a standing ovation. Afterwards, students lined up to talk. Some shared their own stories of complicated families, of grandparents who raised them, of parents who failed them. You don't make peace with it, I told them honestly. You accept it. You acknowledge that some people will disappoint you. And then you find the people who won't. You build your own family. You choose people who choose you back. 15 years after Grandpa died, I was sitting in my chambers when an old photograph fell out of a law book. Me, Grandpa, Grandma, at my 8th birthday, covered in frosting, laughing, completely loved. I stared at that photo for a long time. They gave me everything, not just opportunities. An example of what love looks like in action. I kept that photo on my desk from that day forward. A reminder of where I came from. Not from Diane and Scott, though they created me biologically, but from Helen and William Parker, who created me in every way that mattered. People still ask if I have regrets. If I wish I'd reconciled before they died. The answer is no. Because reconciliation requires two people wanting to bridge a gap. They never wanted that. They just wanted access to money. To claim credit they didn't earn. I don't regret standing firm. I don't regret honoring Grandpa's wishes. I don't regret choosing presence over biology. Those weren't mistakes. They were principles. I'm Justice Haley Morrison. I sit on the state Supreme Court. I make decisions that affect thousands of lives. I protect children, vulnerable people, those who need someone to stand up for them. And I do it knowing the people who truly raised me would be proud. Not because of the title, but because I never compromised who I was. That's my grandfather's real legacy. Not the money, though that provided security. His real legacy was teaching me that love is a verb. That family is built through action. That showing up consistently is the greatest gift you can give, and that honoring the people who showed up for you is the greatest gift you can give back. So, no, I don't regret anything. I regret that my grandparents aren't here to see this, but I know they knew. Even at the end, they knew exactly who I was and who I would be, and they made sure I had everything I needed to become her. That's not a sad ending. That's justice. That's love. That's truth. 20 years after Grandpa died, I received an honor I never expected. The state was renaming the Supreme Court building after him, the William Parker Justice Center. They asked me to speak at the dedication ceremony. I stood at the podium looking at his portrait, now hanging in the main hall. Justice William Parker was many things I began. A brilliant legal mind, a champion of justice, a mentor to countless attorneys and judges. But to me, he was simply Grandpa. The man who saved me when no one else would. The man who taught me that love is demonstrated through action, not claimed through biology. I told the assembled crowd about Sunday dinners, about chess games, about the way he made me feel like the most important person in the world. He could have said no when my parents abandoned me. He was in his 50s, planning for retirement, looking forward to easier years. Instead, he got a baby, then a toddler, then a teenager. He never complained. He just showed up. Every single day. People sometimes ask me if I'm bitter about my childhood, about being abandoned. I'm not. Because being left with William and Helen Parker was the greatest gift I ever received. They showed me what real family looks like, what real love requires, and they prepared me to stand here today, in this building that now bears his name, continuing his work. The ceremony was beautiful. His portrait was perfect. Captured that look he got when he was deep in thought. Considering all angles before making a decision. I stood in front of it for a long time after everyone left. We did it, Grandpa, I whispered. Everything you hoped for, everything you believed I could be. I hope I made you proud. That night, I went through the box of his things I'd kept. The letters he never sent to Diane. The photographs of our life together. The note he left me with the will. I read that letter again, as I did every year on the anniversary of his death. You earned this, it said. Simple words, powerful truth. My career continued flourishing. I wrote more opinions, took on more complex cases, became known as one of the court's most principled justices. But I never forgot where I came from. Never forgot who made it possible. I spoke at schools, mentored young lawyers, especially those from difficult backgrounds. Those who felt like they didn't belong. You do belong, I told them. Not because of where you came from, but because of who you chose to become despite where you came from. That's what matters. I never heard from Scott again after that brief email about Diane. Never knew what happened to him. Never cared to find out. He was irrelevant to my story. Always had been. But I thought about my grandparents every day, especially when making difficult decisions. What would Grandpa do? Became my internal compass. Not because I wanted to copy him, but because his principles were sound, evidence over emotion, truth over convenience, justice over experience. 25 years after Grandpa died, I was awarded the state's highest honor for judicial service. At the ceremony, they played a video of his retirement speech from decades earlier. Hearing his voice again brought tears to my eyes. The law, he said in that speech, is only as good as the people interpreting it. Choose integrity over popularity. Choose truth over convenience. Choose the hard right over the easy wrong. Every time. I built my entire career on those principles. Principles he taught me not in some formal lesson, but through example, through the way he lived, through the choices he made, through the love he showed. That evening, sitting in my chambers, looking at the city lights, I felt profound gratitude. Not bitterness about what I didn't have. Gratitude for what I did. Diane and Scott could have been part of this story. Could have watched me grow. Could have celebrated my achievements. Could have been proud. They chose differently. That was their loss, not mine. I had everything I needed. A career I loved, principles I believed in, a legacy worth honoring. And I had the memory of two people who loved me unconditionally, who showed me what family really means, who gave me roots strong enough to weather any storm and wings strong enough to fly. That's not a tragedy. That's a gift. The greatest gift anyone could receive. As I prepared to leave my chambers that night, I looked once more at the photograph on my desk. Me, Grandpa, Grandma, covered in birthday cake frosting, laughing. That moment captured everything. Pure joy, pure love, pure acceptance. Thank you, I whispered to the photograph, for everything, for choosing me, for loving me, for making me who I am. And I swear, even though it was just a photograph, I could feel them smiling back. Proud of the woman I'd become. Proud that their love had created something lasting, something good, something that would outlive all of us. Because love like that doesn't die. It just transforms. It becomes principles. It becomes strength. It becomes legacy. That's what family really is. Not the people who share your blood, but the people whose love flows through your veins long after they're gone. The people who shaped your soul. The people who showed you what you're capable of becoming. My grandparents did that for me. And in honoring them, in living by their principles, in continuing their work, I keep them alive. That's the real ending to this story. Not that my parents died estranged, but that my grandparents' love lived on. In every decision I make, in every person I help, in every principle I uphold, they're not gone. They're here. In everything I am, in everything I do, forever. 30 years after Grandpa died, I sat in my Supreme Court chambers reviewing a case that felt eerily familiar. Adult children suing their elderly father's estate, claiming his caregiver manipulated him. The facts were almost identical to my own story decades earlier. I called both attorneys into my chambers. I'm going to recuse from this case, I said. But before I do, I want to tell you both something. 32 years ago, I was the defendant in a case just like this one. My parents sued me, claiming I manipulated my grandfather. The court found otherwise. I went on to build a career honoring his legacy. I'm telling you this so you understand why I take these cases seriously, because the truth matters. Make sure you're fighting for the truth, not just the outcome your clients want. Both attorneys left looking thoughtful. The case went to another justice who ruled the same way Judge Brennan had ruled for me. The caregiver won, the children lost. Because actions have consequences, pattern matters, truth prevails. That evening, I drafted what would become my final major opinion before retirement. A comprehensive analysis of family law, parental rights, and estate cases. I drew on 3 decades of experience, both personal and professional. Family, I wrote, is not a biological accident. It is a daily choice. It is showing up when you'd rather stay home. It is loving when it's inconvenient. It is sacrificing when it costs you something. Blood may create connection, but only action creates family. Courts must recognize this distinction. We must stop privileging biology over behavior. We must stop rewarding absence with inheritance. We must start protecting the people who actually show up. The opinion was controversial. It always is when you challenge deeply held beliefs about family. But it was right. I knew it was right because I lived it. That opinion would be my lasting contribution to the law. Long after I was gone, courts would cite it. Judges would reference it. People would use it to protect those who actually deserve protection. 60 years old. 3 decades on the bench. Countless cases decided, countless lives affected. I announced my retirement on the anniversary of Grandpa's death. It felt appropriate. Full circle. Justice Morrison, what's next for you? Reporters asked at the press conference. I'm going to do something I haven't done in 30 years, I replied. Absolutely nothing. I'm going to read books, travel, maybe write. Enjoy the life my grandparents made possible. Any regrets? Someone shouted. I paused, thought carefully. No, I said finally. I've lived exactly the life I was meant to live. I honored the people who deserved honor. I fought for the principles they taught me. I used every gift they gave me. Not just the money, but the values, the strength, the example. I have no regrets. My last day on the bench was emotional. Staff threw a party. Colleagues gave speeches. But the most meaningful moment came when a young attorney approached me. Justice Morrison, I need to thank you. I was raised by my grandmother. My parents were addicts. When they died, distant relatives tried to claim my grandmother manipulated them into leaving her everything. Your opinion from the Morrison case saved us. The judge cited your case. We won. Because of you. I hugged her, tears streaming. That's what it was all for, I said. So others wouldn't have to fight as hard as I did. So the law would recognize what family really means. That night, I visited Grandpa and Grandma's graves for the last time before traveling. I'd be gone for months. Europe, Asia, places they'd always wanted to see, but never did. I'm taking you with me, I told their headstones. All those places you talked about, I'm finally going, and I'll think of you at every stop. The tulips around their graves were blooming. 30 years of spring after spring, those flowers came back. Stubborn. Resilient. Just like love. I pulled out the letter Grandpa left me with his will. I'd read it hundreds of times, but never tired of the words. You earned this, it said. Through showing up, through loving us, through being you. I folded it carefully and put it back in my pocket. I always carried it with me, a reminder of what mattered. As I drove away from the cemetery, I didn't feel sad. I felt grateful. Grateful for 32 years with them. Grateful for everything they taught me. Grateful for the life they made possible. Diane and Scott never got to see who I became. Never got to celebrate my successes. Never got to be proud. Their choice, their loss. But I didn't waste energy on bitterness. They were footnotes in my story. Biology that created me, but didn't raise me. Grandpa and Grandma were the story. Their love, their sacrifice, their example, that's what mattered. That's what lasted. I thought about writing a memoir, telling the whole story, but I decided against it. The story was already told, in court records, in legal opinions, in the lives of people I'd helped, in the precedents I'd set. That was memoir enough. Instead, I'd live. Really live. Travel and read and think. And just be 60 years old, finally free from responsibility, finally able to just exist without always having to prove something, fight something, protect something. But here's what I realized. Even in retirement, I'd carry them with me. Their voices in my head, their principles in my heart, their love in my soul. You don't retire from family, not real family. So this is how the story ends. Not with reconciliation or redemption for people who didn't earn it, but with peace, with gratitude, with the knowledge that love, real love, endures everything. It survives death. It survives time. It survives everything. I'm Haley Morrison. I was raised by William and Helen Parker. They weren't my biological parents. They were my real parents. The ones who chose me. The ones who showed up. The ones who loved me unconditionally for 32 years. And then they left me everything. Not just money, everything that matters. Integrity, strength, purpose, love. That's inheritance. That's legacy. That's family. And 30 years after Grandpa died, 52 years after Grandma died, they're still with me, still guiding me, still loving me. Because that's what real parents do. They never leave. Not really. They just transform into principles you carry, into strength you draw from, into love you pass forward. That's the truth. The whole truth, the only truth that matters. Family isn't who shares your DNA. Family is who shows up every single day for a lifetime. And if you're lucky enough to have people like that in your life, you protect them. You honor them. You become worthy of their love. I did that. I became worthy. I honored them. I protected their legacy. And now, finally, I can rest knowing I did right by the people who did right by me. That's not a sad ending. That's the best ending possible. That's justice. That's love. That's truth. That's everything.